Professor Georgina Mace, thank you so much for agreeing to an interview for A Restored Earth. I wanted to start by asking you for your assessment of what 2 or 3 things globally you feel we ought best to focus on in making a transition from where we are now to the kind of world that we all wish to see in the years and decades ahead.
Okay, well, I'll give you 2.
Please.
So one is, I think we have to think about nature, and I'll define what I mean by nature in a minute. I think we have to put nature firmly at the heart of our planning and prioritisation processes. So we tend at the moment to think of nature as something that you do when you've dealt with all the important stuff. And that has been okay over centuries because there's been enough of what nature delivers to people for us to kind of move on and destroy the next bit or overuse the next bit and so on. But we're now getting to a point where we can't do that anymore on many fronts. We're reaching some kind of level of overuse or degradation that is starting to become a problem. So we have to internalise nature into all planning, priority setting, investment choices. Now what I mean by nature is not just beautiful species in beautiful places. I mean all the things that nature gives us for free, the natural processes and structures, the clean air that we breathe, the clean water that we need, the natural decomposition that microbes in the soil provide, the energy that comes from stored sources as well as from renewables. So all these things nature gives people for free, and we just don't take them seriously enough. So I think we have to internalise that, recognise that it's vital and a constraint, and think about it seriously. The second thing, which is actually rather a different one and is more in line with what you're talking about in your book, is to stop always doing business as usual and trying to tweak it a little bit to make things slightly better, but to have some kind of vision of where we want to get to think about this better world where goods and benefits that people on Earth can have are shared sustainably and equitably, and we can kind of secure them for the future. And the history of people's life on Earth has been just to kind of do stuff, and then when a new way of doing things comes along, to adopt it, and if it kind of points upwards, you go on doing it. If it goes downwards, well, you kind of forget it. But we need something a bit more visionary and kind of going, this is where we could be, and if we work hard, we can get there.
Thank you. That's wonderful. And if you could imagine that kind of world, what would it look like to you, and what sort of things do you have in mind?
So, I mean, I when I started thinking about this actually was around the time of the 2012 UN conference in Rio. And they had this process called The World We Want, which I thought was a really great idea. So yes. it was a civil society thing. I think it's continuing now, actually. Yeah. And so it was a very inclusive process. And it came up with some really weird things, actually. So, I mean, I'm not quite sure what I want. For me, as an ecologist, or as a natural scientist anyway, it would lay out what it is that the Earth provides for us, nature and all its processes and functions, and then something about what the demands from that are going to be in 25, 50, 100 years' time, looking at people's, the distribution of people over the Earth and the kind of things they might be doing, and just going, if we want to secure those benefits for all people, what do we have to put in place now? And it would be things like, climate change is an obvious one. We should not be storing up problems for future generations. It would be things like looking at the distribution of major watersheds. How secure are they? What could we do not to kind of canalise and abstract for immediate use, but to secure those things for the future? Looking at where food will be most sustainably grown in 20, 50 years' time, and making sure that soil and water in those areas is secure, that kind of thing. So, it could sound quite utilitarian, but I think the result of it would be something that then sustains wild species and ecological systems by default.
Brilliant.
Of course, as a conservationist, I would also have my top list of 50 species that I would want to make sure are also well secured.
Through better conservation through protected areas, etc.
Yeah, well, maybe through protected areas. It could well be that when you've done all that more utilitarian stuff, some of them just get taken care of by that, because by its nature that means having some large areas of forest or some large freshwater areas, and then there'll be a few species that are left behind. And then you might need to do protection. You might need to do just better protection in a number of existing places. You might need to build some new ones. You might need to just put in some good corridors and intervening habitat in the matrix, that kind of thing.
All of the above, yes.
Yeah, I think it sounds like it's a lot of stuff, but many of these things are actually very complementary. So the minute you have forests that do climate control, they also do water and soil regulation and wildlife as well. So you suddenly find that lots of things are sort of ticked off halfway just by doing one of them. There are lots of synergies.
Very clear, thank you. So in 2050, there would be a way in this scenario of all, to call it 9 billion of us, to live in some form of harmony with the natural world, which would ensure the protection of many, if not all, of the species with which we coexist, but which would also fulfil human needs. We would find a way of living within planetary boundaries, in other words.
That is the idea, yeah. I don't know how easy that would be. It may be that world that we live in is not exactly the one that we live in now. I'm pretty sure we wouldn't have the same amount of consumption and wealth and diet choice that we have now. But I don't think that would be a hardship for most people.
Thank you. And are there particular cases that you already study or familiar with that point to the kind of world that you're describing, areas of work either in the UK or internationally, which you would particularly point to?
Well, there's two that I've worked on. So one was I've worked on these two Lancet commissions on climate change and health and on planetary health. And those were largely with the medical profession, with doctors who are concerned about public health and environment, which curiously, I think everybody knows that public health and environment are intimately linked, but the body of science around that is actually not, it's very specific about kind of pollutants and air quality and things. But anyway, through both of those, it's very clear that most of the things that you do that would be effective for mitigating or adapting to climate change are also very good for health. So from simple things like how people live their lives, active transport, walking and cycling, which benefit the climate but also benefit people's health, green space in urban areas, there's a lot of sort of what your local environment would be like. But then all the stuff of kind of cutting down on air pollution, particulates, aerosols and things, which damage the climate, also turn out to be bad for people's health. So there are loads and loads of win-wins in that kind of area. The second one was the work we did in the UK, actually both for the National Ecosystem Assessment and more recently that we've done with the Natural Capital Committee, just looking at investments in natural capital, taking a more hard-lined, classical economist approach and looking at your return on investment. So what would we get from investing in another 250,000 hectares of woodland in the UK, for example? So this isn't work that I've done, but it's work that my colleagues there did, who are proper economists. And if you do those returns on investment, just like the government does it for roads or railways or broadband or whatever, those come up as being good investments. Putting in more woodland in the right place, there's lots of recreational values, there are lots of health values, there are wildlife values, there are benefits for soil and water regulation, flood control. So you can sort of see on these case studies.
Yes.
We did it in the last Natural Capital report, the one that came out in 2015, I think. We had 3 or 4 of these case studies: woodlands, salt marshes. I can't remember what the...
Don't worry.
But anyway, there were other floodplains.
Yeah,
Ones.
yeah.
And they come out with these benefit-cost ratios, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 1, which is completely competitive with what government uses to invest in roads and railways.
Exactly. And so doing the right thing by nature makes good economic sense.
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask you about population. It comes up in some of the interviews that I've done as a big challenge. David Attenborough mentioned it, others did too. You have a background in population and demography as well as your ecology, I understand, and I wanted to ask for your view on that issue.
Yeah, so my part of my ecological training is as a population biologist.
A population biologist.
So
yes.
so I've kind of studied life histories of wild species, which and the thing that I learned very early on in that is that what matters in life histories is the kind of turnover time, is the generation length. So for many of the world's most endangered species, they're very long-lived, slow reproducing, slow turnover species. It's very difficult to turn around population size in species like that. Actually, funnily enough, rhinos and elephants, which live a long time, if you give them a good environment, they can do very well. This is a bit of a distraction. But the thing that we always forget about population is it's not, or demography is, it's not years that influences it, it's that generation time. So humans have a very long generation time, 25 years on average between generations. And what that means is that anything that you do now to slow population growth rate takes a very long time to kick in. So if you introduce more social measures or contraceptive innovations or whatever now, it really doesn't kick in for another 25 or even 50 years. There's nothing you can do with population quickly. Even wars turn out to be, you kill lots of people, but then you get a rebound afterwards. So there's no question, I agree with David Attenborough here, that all these problems would be easier if there weren't so many people. But there are a lot of people. And there's not a lot that you can do about it in the short term. And all the evidence is that the very best thing you can do is to improve the lives of young women, particularly to educate them, give them access to contraception, but make them feel fully a part of society. And that is the thing that reduces the birth rate. And actually the educating girls turns out to be the most effective of all of those. Yeah. So, the reason I don't worry about population too much is I think there's not a lot you can do about it in the short term. And the things that you can do about it are things that we'd want to do anyway. So we should just get on and do those, no question.
And we're trying, yeah.
The second thing is, it's not population that's the problem. It's the impact of every single individual. So it's the consumption footprint of every one of those 7 billion people that matters. If we all cut our consumption footprint in half, that's the same as cutting the population in half. Yeah. But it doesn't involve killing lots of people or imposing lots of birth control and whatever. And you can do it overnight. Well, yes, it doesn't take this 25 to 50 years to do it. So for me, trying to deal with population is not a terribly useful way to go about it. It's full of strongly held, rather unhelpful views a lot of the time. It's very difficult. And we can deal with the problem much more effectively just by dealing with the impact consumption side.
and living with a lighter footprint. And in the book, there's a chapter I'm trying to write about what communities can do individually or at the community level to reduce their footprint. And there are lots of obvious things that.
Yeah, I mean, we could do this really easily. Yeah. I mean, even the sort of meat-eating one.
Yes.
Is quite an easy win.
Yeah.
You don't have to do anything terrible, hair-shirty, to get there. So, you know, that's why... And the population one is also terribly complicated because when you start interfering in populations like the Chinese did with the one-child policy, or when you have these very rapid growth spurts, as we've seen, you know, in Southeast Asia and so on, you get an unbalanced demography. So you get a lot of old people and not very many young people, or a lot of young people and not very many old people. And societies are rather unstabilised by that. There aren't enough young people paying taxes to pay for the old people. Or the old people don't have enough carers, or there's a lot of angry young men looking for a war to fight. And so what we want to move towards is a stable demography, one where you've got a predictable balance of older people and younger people and healthy people and unhealthy, you know, so that you can plan for it. And a lot of the measures that go into trying to deal with population end up tipping it into this unstable demography, and then you get lots of migration and, you know, lots of suffering as a result of this big families or small families or whatever it is.
Very clear. I wanted to ask you, Georgina, about sort of making a link between the different issues that I'm trying to tackle in the book. As you know, there's a chapter on climate change, a chapter on forests, both tropical and temperate, a chapter on soil, on fresh water, on biodiversity, there's a chapter on the oceans and marine environment and cities and waste, and then the last two chapters are on what you can do individually and then what we need to do globally. But in those first 8 chapters, I'm advised by Tony, who's a mentor and a friend in this project, to try and seek out the linkages wherever possible. I know that's something you're very good at doing. I've heard you do it in your lectures, and I wondered whether you could help me tease out various sort of links across these themes between climate change and ecosystem health and so on.
Yes. So, so the way I look at this at the moment, because I'm thinking about in this natural capital ecosystem health thing, is to just conceptualise it all as a series of bubbles, if you like, where the core of that bubble is all this natural stuff. So ultimately, we all rely on, you know, weathering of rocks and ocean cycles and microbes in the soil circulating nutrients and, you know, plants bringing CO2. So there's this kind of core of ecology that produces the energy on which we all depend, produces all the nutrients that we then use. And those are just sort of natural processes that we don't really do much with. We should make sure they're all there and functioning. I mean, there's all this synthetic biology stuff that's trying to replace them, but mostly that isn't going anywhere at the moment. So that sits there. And then what people do, and what we've been very good at, and actually other species do as well, is to kind of intervene in those processes for our own benefit. So we've converted some of those plants to agricultural crops. We tip more nitrogen on to produce more food, and so we've radically increased the amount of plant biomass, say, and then we eat it, and then we radically increase the number of people. So we're kind of intervening in that natural system. And then the layer beyond that is the sort of the hard economy. You know, people then take those products and you get this kind of runaway use of them. They become very profitable, so you do more and more of them until for some reason you've run out of something, and then you turn to whatever else you can now make money out of. So I think that middle layer, the kind of nurturing layer, the bit where we try to manage the earth so that it meets the needs of all people and all life on it, is the bit that kind of goes wrong when it's driven by this unhelpful external economy. So getting that economy sorted out so that it feeds back sensibly into the middle layer is the trick.
So And would that require simply internalising all externalities in the economist's language?
Well,
Or is it beyond that?
I think it's a bit beyond that, unfortunately.
Mm.
The reason the reason I don't actually think that works is that the signals are too late. That by the time you've realised that there's an externality you've got to internalise, usually you've passed the point of it being useful. And that's why I think that, it's why I've become more attracted by the natural capital idea, because the natural capital says it's just a system. It's a system you've got to understand and nurture. It's not a set of goods and services that you're going to try and maximise or optimise or regularise or whatever. It's about that system, so it's heading back towards the centre rather than the outputs from systems. It's all getting a bit abstract.
No, it's very good.
So when you get to things like climate change, or even some of the new technologies, even just being able to synthesise nitrogen or genetic modification or whatever, those things on their own are not the problem. Climate change would not be a problem if it was just the climate that was changing. GM is a good technology. It's how we understand the impact of that shift in the environment on this system that we're trying to manage. And the ridiculous thing with climate change is we know that climate's changing, but we're not trying to manage that system, recognising that it's going to get hotter and drier and more unpredictable. We're just kind of carrying on with business as usual. And as it turns out, climate change is going to be a big shock to that system, so we should be dealing with it. Genetic modification, I think, can be a perfectly good technology. It could help us with many of these problems. But as it turns out, the way it's implemented and marketed and the whole industry around that is extremely unhelpful.
Problematic.
Yeah. So it's not the technology that's the problem, it's the implementation. So I think, just sort of seeing it as a system that we need to work with and live with is really important. Now the biodiversity one, I think, gets very complicated here, because I really hate this word actually. I work in a centre that has it in its name, but, because it just means
It's not a word that's really captured people's imagination.
And it's really some people mean by it just, greenness.
All things green.
Anything green. Some people mean natural and intact, i.e. some sort of historical situation that we'd like to go back to the world as it was in 1900 or 1750 or something. For ecologists, it actually means how many species there are. It has a very technical, how diverse it is or how much genetic variability there is, which has no societal context at all. It's just a measure of it. And in this kind of sustainability world, it can end up being perceived as a problem. We've got to save the world and all this water and climate and stuff. Oh, and we've got to deal with all these species as well. And of course that's not true at all. Those species very often are the solution to some of these other problems. And so I kind of worry that it sometimes is seen as, if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, and it's like, and number 16, let's deal with biodiversity, as if it was a separate problem, which it really isn't. There are some species that will need additional efforts that are difficult, but mostly, if we deal with many of these other problems, we'll deal with biodiversity as well. Very
interesting. So, do you have a view on E.O. Wilson's half-Earth idea?
Yeah. So as I said at the beginning, I like the idea of setting some ambitious goals. The sort of half-Earth and rewilding and all these things fall in that category of ambitious goals. I'm not sure they're the best goals. They feel very arbitrary. And I don't, for me the goal would actually be about a good life for people and nature, and those two are interrelated. And just sort of saying half the world for nature, I think you could end up with an awful other half of the world for people if you didn't deal with it very well. So I'd sooner see it as a people and nature linked goal, not kind of prioritising some wilderness thing.
I like your good life for people and nature.
Yes.
That sounds like a very faithful reflection of
yes, well,
where we're in and what we're seeking to do.
Yeah. I mean, I think this, and I think it's becoming much more mainstream now, the people and nature thing. Yeah, looking at all the literature that's coming out of the conservation organisations and that's coming out of the UN and so on, it is much more about this interdependency between people and nature.
That's good. Which doesn't negate nature's intrinsic value.
No, absolutely not. In fact, it may even emphasise it.
I wanted to ask you about cities and nature. The Planet Earth 2 ends with this episode of nature flourishing somehow.
I know, in a rather bizarre kind of way.
It was slightly bizarre.
It was very bizarre.
It was bizarre. It was fascinating. I asked David Attenborough, he said it was... I asked him whether it was a salvation. He said it was somewhat peripheral, but nevertheless he was interested by it. And I mean, there's a lot of good things we can do to protect nature in our urbanising world. Is this something you look at as well?
Yes. Well, so nature in the cities. We have a lot of nature in the cities. We actually have more species now living in our cities than I think this was in Planetary.
Yes.
We have more species than we ever have.
Yes.
But that doesn't actually mean it's all good.
No.
And what we also have is an absolutely terrible air quality, water quality, energy bill, etc. in our cities. But it need not be like that.
Yeah.
Cities can be, well-designed cities can do this reducing the footprint thing very well. You see some of the Scandinavian cities where they've done this well, where you design it properly. So, and there you use these, the natural capacity of ecological systems to help cities do things well. So things like these sustainable urban drainage systems, having trees that help you with air quality, having a good distribution of green spaces that give recreational value and air quality and water quality, and provide somewhere for kids to run around and so on. So there's a way of doing nature in cities that is mutually beneficial all round. It's not about having tigers wandering around.
Roaming around.
Although, I mean, I think it's great that can happen. I'm not quite sure that makes it a sustainable nature.
The leopards in Mumbai.
Yes, that was really funny. That was really funny.
Fascinating. I wanted to ask you a question. You prompted me to ask you a question about invasive species and what's your view about all of that. An image of the parakeets in London came into my mind, and Fred Pearce's new book. What's your view on that issue?
Yeah, so I mean, invasive species are a real problem, and if you look at the current red list and the impacts of invasive species worldwide, they have been devastating for most remote locations and continue to be. However, I'm afraid it's with us, and it's the reality. We're changing the world. People are moving around, and sometimes we may end up being perfectly okay with some of these invasive species. So I mean, and it's the opening up of wildlife corridors and stepping stones across the landscape to help species cope with climate change will inevitably also help invasive species to use those corridors and hop across the landscapes. So I think we have to be careful about invasive and deleterious invasive species, but I'm not about to kind of try and shut the door and stop anything moving around, because I think it's part of what's got to happen. It's going to happen, and we just need to make it work well and not badly.
I hear from you throughout the sort of application of the mind and the intellect and the understanding to our situation in a sort of nuanced way, non-ideological in a sense, quite practical. On the marine environment, I'm struggling because so much of the solution to the big problems of ocean acidification and so on appear to reside in climate change mitigation, i.e., the very fast transition to renewable energy and reduction of fossil fuel emissions and all the rest of it. But there are presumably lots of things we can do in the ocean oceans, the marine environment, to make things better, aside from addressing climate change? Do you work a lot on marine matters?
I don't actually, although I'm starting to. I've got a couple of students at the moment who seem to have chosen me as a supervisor by mistake. Not really, who work on marine things, not realising I don't know anything about them. So I'm learning. So the marine thing is really different. I mean, as an ecologist, I always used to kind of think, oh, there's the land and then there's the sea, and the process is the same, so I can just kind of translate from one to the other. And actually doesn't work at all. And the big differences are, one, there aren't any people in the ocean, it's just the effluent and impacts of people. And two, nobody owns it or manages it. So the governance issues are really difficult. So whereas on land we can say to people, you know, you're responsible for this patch, and when things go wrong there, you're going to have to deal with it. And the ocean just don't do that. Things go wrong and it's nobody's problem. We're still in this moving around and exploiting one area after the other. So, but from all the sort of wildlife and ecological systems and processes, it is kind of like the land. It's just that we haven't yet had that big impact on it. Although things like ocean acidification, even just warming, sea level rise, and a lot of the kind of pollution, plastics, effluent, eutrophication and so on, are having massive impacts on it. But it's all stuff that we're doing on land.
On land, yes.
So the actions are on land. It's just that's the all the flows are into the ocean. So I think it's it's really
hard.
Really hard. And the thing that it needs is just like the climate change convention. I think we need a global, international, intergovernmental convention around the oceans.
With teeth, yes.
Yes, that really does it properly. I mean, UNFCCC, I don't think they'd ever do it again because it's been so problematic, but it did bring the attention of the world's powers, national governments, to a public good problem.
Yes.
And that's what the oceans are. They're a public good.
And the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea is an imperfect instrument.
And it's very narrow.
Very narrow, yeah.
It only deals with certain things, and you know, it sort of got tied up in legal things. Whereas what you need is something more broadly based, like UNFCCC was. You know, we need a state of the atmosphere that's going to make the planet livable for people. We need a state of the oceans that's going to make a planet livable for people. And I kind of see the oceans more like the atmosphere than the land, actually.
Very interesting. I'm sure you're right. Eleanor Ostrom came to mind as you were describing.
Yeah. Well, all that public, it is the public goods.
Public goods, yes, yeah. I wanted to come back to the land and forests, which is my area, our area of work, and this idea that a big solution to climate change would be to protect the world's remaining forests, tropical and temperate, reduce forest degradation wherever possible, and defaunation forests.
Yeah.
But then also there's a big opportunity to restore degraded forests around the world, of which there are many millions of hectares, and either restore them to forest, which would be ideal from an environmental perspective, or to a diverse range of agroecological landscapes in which there's agroforestry and a variety of uses, silvopasture and so on. If we did all of that, the argument in science suggests this would equate to something in the order of a third of global greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah.
Is this something that you share and work on as well?
Yeah, well, so we did this, one of my colleagues here actually has been working for many years on this Predicts project, which is a big biodiversity analysis project based on gathering data from field sites all around the world. This is actually Andy Purvis at the Natural History Museum runs this project. It's really great.
Great.
And the first, if you just Google Predicts project, you'll see
Thank you. Yeah.
the first big paper that we did on it was to model what would happen to biodiversity, so to species richness and variability and functional diversity and all those kinds of things, were we to follow each of the UNFCCC representative concentration pathways. Do you know these? Yes. RCP 2.5, 4.6, 6 and 8.5.
Yes.
So 8.5 is the business as usual one, where you essentially carry on emitting and knocking down forests and so on, and you can model that over the next 50 years or so, and you end up losing most biodiversity. 2.5, which is the most optimistic climate change scenario, turns out to be one where you have lots of kind of biomass crops. So it's actually rather unhelpful. But the RCP 4 point whatever it is, 2 or 6 or something, is the one that's kind of what you're talking about, where you restore, protect forests, and in areas of the world where, particularly ones that aren't good for agriculture, you plant new forests to specifically try and deal with climate change. So it does a lot for climate change. And of the 4 in this biodiversity model, it's the one that does most for biodiversity.
Oh, that's encouraging.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it's because 2.5, which is the one that is best for climate, has all this biomass crop and so on.
Which is problematic for biodiversity and also for food security.
And for food. So I think it's kind of unrealistic, that 2.5 one.
Yeah.
So the problem with 4 point whatever it is it's not quite clear what happens there with food. Although there are ways of doing the forest planting in a way that doesn't compete with good agricultural land. But it was really impressive, and it wasn't just species richness. All the biodiversity metrics, the sort of functional diversity and the distribution across the landscape, all did quite well under 4.6. We were all quite surprised.
Very interesting. Thank you. I will look that up. Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
So it's in a there's a Nature paper in 2015.
Okay.
That's got the diagram in it. I can send it to you.
That's very kind. Thank you, Georgina. So I've asked most of my interviewees so far, we're sort of concluding a couple of questions which are around, are you optimistic, pessimistic? My aunt reminded me that there's a very good response to that, which eludes me, but which is very amusing. It's just something of a trite question, but that would be one question. But are you optimistic or pessimistic? I suppose we might start.
Yeah, I mean, people are always asking me this. It's a panel.
Well, I know. Maybe I should stop asking this.
So basically, I'm an optimistic person, but I am pessimistic. So I think it's very unlikely that we're going to do the things I've talked about. Just because, just look around the world. I mean, we're getting further away from making these sensible kinds of decisions. But my main answer to it is it's in our hands. It's kind of is that there isn't. It doesn't help my being optimistic or pessimistic.
Yeah.
It is within our ability in the next 10 or 20 years to completely change this and to make a big difference. So it's not like our destiny is fixed.
No, quite. Yes.
It's we just need to get on and do it.
There's everything to play for.
Yeah, there really is.
And we know what we need to do.
I mean, we should have done it 20 years ago.
Yes.
It would have been a bit easier 20 years ago, but there's still time to make a huge difference.
And we have the SDGs, and we've
the
got
SDGs.
Impact.
There were 2015 was a really great year. I mean, the SDGs are fantastic.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah.
And the Paris Agreement was
Yeah.
really great, and there was this new disaster risk reduction agreement,
Agreed.
which was
also very important.
and which said, building in resilience using natural systems is a really good thing to do. So those 3 big international agreements were all absolutely on the button. And in 2016, we should have just been
getting on with that.
Getting on and letting them run away with their own energies. But for some reason, we've gone completely backwards.
Yes, which is a disaster. But there's always hope, as you say, and it is within our hands.
Yes, it's not fixed. It's not our destiny to do one or the other.
And perhaps we need to find new ways of telling the story about what we're trying to do, and also we need to describe better what we're hoping to the kind of world we're hoping bring into being.
Yeah.
Maybe there are enough facts, people know all they need to know, but there's a deficit of inspiration.
Yeah,
And
I think so. I think the facts are not interesting. I mean, I went to when we launched one of these Lancet reports, the one on climate change and health. We went and did it at the Science Media Centre. And it was really funny actually, because the Science Media Centre people said, oh, you know, we'll get no journalists here. Oh, it's about climate change. You know, everyone's bored of it. There's nothing new to say. And then the medics involved said, well, we've got all this health stuff coming up. And they're, we'll push the health thing. That always gets journalists. And they put out a press release that was all about, I forget how they put it, but it was kind of improving urban health, you know, and dealing with climate change risk at the end. You know, a big report from the Lancet, etc. And the room was full, absolutely full, but they were mostly health people. And they were interested in, yes, what are the benefits of walking and cycling, you know, all that kind of thing. And the science media people said to us, you know, that the only way you're going to be able to communicate climate change is through these kind of messages, bringing it back to individual people, your own heart, your own brain, your children's immune system. That's the message it's going to get across.
Which is why these air pollution campaigns at the moment that Greenpeace and others are running, it's really striking a chord with the public.
Yeah. Well, and also because air quality
is so valuable. Exactly, what's the point? And do you think the planetary health theme is as powerful as the human health idea?
I would like to think it was, because I think it's really important that it's not just, you know, local and us. It does have this wider perspective. So the problem that the planetary health one is that people always think it's about the health of the planet. You know, and that's not it at all, because actually the planet's going to be fine. Still here. It may not have any people on it. It may just be covered in slime and bacteria, but it will still be here. You know, and there is no such thing as a healthy planet.
Right.
It's a planet that's healthy for people, or healthy for E. coli, or healthy for black rats. You know, there isn't a sort of, which is part of my sort of half-Earth problem. There isn't a desirable state for the planet that you can define, unless you define it in terms of people and their relationship with nature or something. So the planetary health often gets misunderstood as being, it's about the planet, and actually it's not. It's about people.
And all of life within the planet. Yes. Very interesting. Well, Georgina, thank you. You've been very generous with your time and your intellect. I hope the book is of some value that it reflects.
Yeah, it would be good. I think this looking forward is really important. You know, looking to stop people harking back to some idealistic vision of the past. You know, it was all great in 1960, and instead looking forward, look how great it could be in 2050 if we just could.
Do the right thing from here on in. And do you like the idea of a restored Earth?
Yes, I do. I think restoration is part of it, actually. But there's no reason why there can't be novel ecosystems too, so long as you do them carefully. I mean, you know, protection, then restoration, but every now and then you're going to have to do something a bit more radical.
Great. Thank
you. So that's going to be the title, is it?
It is. It's a provisional title, A Restored Earth, 10 Paths to a Hopeful Future. And I like the title, but we'll see if it's
10 paths.
10 paths.
Have you got 10?
I've got 10. Well, yes. I mean, the last two. One is the 9th path is individual action, and then the 10th path is sort of a new international partnership.
Right.
I'm going to try and argue for a kind of global Marshall Plan to sort of, salvage the natural environment.
So for that one, you might look at some of this. I really like this investing in nature stuff. You know, just in the same way as when, you know, the government decided we were going to have the Olympics and we'll invest in the Olympic Park and, you know, we'll have a legacy from it. We should be able to invest in nature. Let's invest in forests or invest in wetlands or salt marshes or whatever it is, and treat them as a solution, not as a problem. Like, we'll deal with all this, and then we'll, you know, give a few £1,000s to deal with the salt marshes.
Yes, exactly.
Which is the current approach by most governments.
And I liked what you said earlier about fresh water, you know, sort of securing the world's great vital fresh water supplies.
Yeah.
Sort of big strategic thinking about those as well as other aspects of the environment.
Yes, which is another big public good.
Yes, yeah. So there'll be something on all of that at the end, but the core 8 paths are the ones we've discussed: climate, forest, soil, biodiversity, etc., water, cities, waste, ocean. But it's a huge subject, but we'll see how it goes. But I'm very grateful to you.
Okay.
And it'd be lovely to count on your
Yes, well, good luck
through
with
it.
it.
Thank you.
Shall I send you that? I'll send you
That would
that
be
predicts
brilliant.
paper, shall I?
Yes, that would be wonderful. Thank